Hi, class. As you can see, I've gone through a transformation of my own. Not quite the character transformation that I'm hoping for, but shave the head, get a nice, easy summer look going. Hope you enjoy. I'm here to respond. We've been dealing with N.T. Wright and some of that reading, and I enjoyed your posts very much. I just have a few comments. One of the first things I wanted to say as a point of clarification. It's interesting, some of you were on both sides of this. Some of you accurately called N.T. Wright out on this, and others of you, I think, bought into N.T. Wright and sort of misrepresented Aristotle some. So there's a misunderstanding that Aristotle only cares about the individual and individual virtue, that it's an individual effort, and that it's self-glorification in some way. I'm reaching excellence for my own happiness, my own flourishing. This is not true. I think N.T. Wright absolutely misses the mark when he sort of begins to overemphasize the individualism of Aristotle. That's just not accurate. Aristotle is part of a Greek culture. Plato is part of this culture as well, Socrates, others. Community comes first. Aristotle is not part of the United States. It's not part of the American dream where individual rights and individual success and I work hard and earn individual wealth or claims for myself. No. The individual is here to serve the community. Community comes first. I mean, Aristotle makes it really clear. If I'm talented and gifted at something, whether I want to do it or not, I need to give those gifts and talents to the community. It's not up to me what I want to do. In fact, he says, it shows a lack of character. Because what I should want, the proper desires of a fully formed character, would be to desire to give my talents to the community. And the fact that I don't says something about me, and then I need to do it out of obligation. But it's not about my own flourishing. It is about me becoming a virtuous person so that I might flourish, but not me alone. It's that I might pour my flourishing, my talents, my cultivated character back into the community, that the community might flourish. The most important virtue is justice, but that is a communal virtue. That is not an isolated virtue. That virtue only exists in community. Courage is not an isolated virtue. It's a communal virtue. Temperance, prudence. So it is not about me glorifying myself. It is about me helping my community to meet its ultimate telos. So some of you, I think, were on the wrong side of that. Some of you rightly pointed that out. So there's a communal nature there to Aristotle. With that being said, there's still some radical differences between Aristotle and Christianity, and some of them you've already been pointing out. I don't think the ultimate Christian telos is necessarily flourishing. I don't think it's totally incompatible. Jesus does call us to live the abundant life, to seek after well-being. I don't know that that's ultimately what I'm after, and so that'll be some discussion later on. Certainly the virtues are different. Aristotle's not going to talk about faith, hope, or love, forgiveness as virtues. But I think there's something more going on here. I really think Jesus calls us to an upside-down kingdom, a kingdom totally different from the values we find in the world and in culture, and certainly in Greek culture. Very different to live in that kingdom, in part of that community. And that's something I think Aristotle really misses the mark on, or at least it's not compatible fully with Christianity. And so some of you are touching on these within your posts. The rich young ruler, I think, is a great example of this upside-down kingdom. And I talked about it in my lecture some. I won't repeat that entirely, but it sort of reveals the upside-down kingdom of Jesus. And in Mark chapter 10, it's framed, you have Matthew, and you have Mark and you have John coming down the mountain. I believe those are the two disciples, after the transfiguration. And they're arguing, this is in Mark chapter 10. These are the things that bracket the rich young ruler in Mark. And they're asking about who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And I want to be on your right, and can I be on your left? And they're asking Jesus essentially, please let us sit at the places of honor in your kingdom. And Jesus says, can you drink this cup? Right? I mean, that's his response. Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink, the cup of suffering? the cup of selflessness, the cup of martyrdom. Can you drink this cup? And then he goes on to say, because if you want to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, you must be last. You want to lead, you need to serve. Totally upside down kingdom. So the power structures of the world are turned upside down. Pouring myself out, broken and poured out for the world. Suffering, serving, loving, caring, putting others before myself. Right, Philippians chapter 2. This is the way to the place of honor in heaven. This is the new way we set up honor and power. Aristotle would not be in favor of this, right? This is not the world we live in. These are not the power structures of the world. But these are the power structures in the kingdom. It's awesome, right? Radical call. There's issues of divorce and sexuality and how to deal with that. But marriage and whatnot is not about preference, your desires, your wants. This is about a covenant. Divorce is about becoming one. Marriage is about one flesh. And so divorce is not something that we do out of convenience. And so we transform this marriage relationship. And then, of course, the rich young ruler. So as N.T. Wright says, you've got sex, money, and power right here in chapter 10. And there's an upside-down relationship to money. Instead of requiring more and wealth being a good thing, Jesus says we are to live with an open hand. All is God's. Give it to the poor and come follow me. Serve me. This is what the Christian life calls us to, and we don't really like it, and the rich young ruler walks away. And this is the real key. I don't think this is just a rule put on top of the rich young ruler to make it miserable. I think Jesus is really saying, this is the road to the abundant life. Don't you see it? You're missing human flourishing. Detach from your things. Give them away so that you can be free to fully serve me. This is a radical call in the middle of an upside-down kingdom. Are we willing to live the way Christ calls us to live? I don't know. This is a tough thing to do. I need to transform my character in order to do it. In some sense, it's not just doing it, it's desiring it. Remember, virtue is about shaping my desires. And so, at some point, I have to want Christ more, desire him more than comfort, protection, and money. And right now, I don't know that I do. I should desire faithfulness over worldly possessions. And the rich young ruler is not ready to do that. Do we really believe, do we have enough faith that this is about human flourishing, that this is the abundant life? Because you have to live into it before it reveals itself to you to be true. I have to step out on faith and say, I'm going to trust you, Lord, and do the things you ask me and follow you. And as I do that, it becomes apparent that this is a better way to live, and that I'm truly blessed and flourishing when I see that all is God's. Very upside-down way of looking at power. Same thing with service. When I truly get to live for others, serving others, selflessly loving, I start to live the abundant life, and I realize my relationships are better. I look at myself in the mirror differently. I'm closer to God, and I'm flourishing in a way I never thought possible when I was striving for power and control of my life and of others. And so this upside-down kingdom, I think, is very different, and it requires things like faith and hope and the cultivation of that virtue. So I hope that this is starting to make sense to you. And then finally, N.T. Wright, in pages like 26 through 30, starts talking about neuroscience. We're going to talk about this in week 8 a lot. It's something I care very deeply. I really care about it. Some of this will be said in week 8, but let me say a little bit here. There's really good neuroscientific evidence to suggest this notion of habituation really works. That when you do things, when you experience things in the world, you create neural networks. The more you do something, the deeper those neural networks get and the more natural they become. And we just know this to be true. Think of it like snow sledding. Right? I'll use this analogy later. If you get up to the top of a hill and there's been no one that's gone down on a sled, you get on your sled and you go down a little ways, packing the snow. Then you get back and walk up. Well, the next time you're going to go a little bit further. It's going to get a little slicker. You go down it 50 times. Pretty soon you're all the way down the bottom. You're just flying down, right, because you've packed that snow. pretty soon it gets to a place where if your sled is even near the runway, you'll start to like find yourself like gravitating and then getting sucked down into the hill because all the snow's been packed down towards that run that you've created. This is what happens in our brain. You do something once, little neural network, twice, 50 times, 100 times, it gets deeper and deeper. This is addiction. This is what happens. You do something over and over, like take like cocaine or crack or heroin. Not only does your body desire it, but you have certain triggers. You see something and immediately your brain makes you desire, think of the drug because you've done it over and over. Habituation can work in the opposite way, in good ways. That we habituate ourselves and create neural networks that when we see certain things, it immediately evokes desires for compassion or forgiveness or generosity or love. So we train our brains and we create these deep neural networks the more we do something. And it's very powerful. And so he references a couple of these studies that are famous, the violin study, the area of the brain associated with left hand coordination and dexterity can double in size in violin players because more information is being sent to the brain from the left hand, and the brain simply adapts and creates more area designed to receive those signals. Amazing. Cab drivers in London, their tracking device, the part of the brain that deals with spatial intelligence and directionality, their area of the brain dealing with that is like 2 or 3 times larger than the non-taxi cab driver because they're dealing with where am I, where do I need to go, the internal map and grid that you have in your mind of the town you live in. They have to reference that over and over. They're sending those signals to the brain. The brain adjusts by dedicating more energy to that thing. Well, the more time I spend in spiritual disciplines, the more time I spend cultivating the virtues, the more of the brain dedicated to that. It becomes more natural, and these deep neural networks become second nature in certain ways. So we have good evidence, and one of the things we're going to talk about, they have lots of studies on meditation, Eastern meditation, and the reason is that the Dalai Lama has been convinced by the neural research, the neuroscientific research. So he's been encouraging Tibetan monks to come to the United States, mostly in Madison, Wisconsin, and go to their neuroscience lab where they have MRIs of their brain taken before meditation, during meditation, after meditation, all kinds of different variations to try to see how does meditation affect the brain. They'll bring expert meditators, over 40,000 hours of meditation, novices, beginners, to see what difference that makes. Does habituation over time make a big difference? One of the series of fascinating studies is how it relates to compassionate behavior. And we'll talk about some of these studies when we get to chapter 8. But ultimately, there's a form of meditation called compassion meditation where you try to think loving thoughts about an individual, then about an enemy, then about yourself, and then about the world. And just try to think and feel that, generate that sense of care and compassion and love. And doing that, there's evidence now that increases compassionate behavior and compassionate responses to suffering. And we'll sort of look at some of that. But the idea is, it works. And the meditators, those that have been meditating in that way, show an increased response rate to those that have not been. Well, I assume the same thing would happen if we're dedicated to prayer. What about scripture or tithe? What about confession? Might those help us with generosity, humility, faith? And so maybe these habits can actually have we can see the effect on the brain. And this goes back to the CV view, the Constitution view. We've got to take the body seriously. We've got to take the brain seriously because it seems like that governs a lot of our behavior. And if we can do things that can actually change our brains and thus change our desires and our behavior, we should be paying attention. So I hope this helps. And if you have any questions at all, let me know, and I'll see you online.